Derpy Maelstrom is finally here, and it looks to be like he's a lot better than his grandfather was during the V series. So this is going to be spicy.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another Cardfight update, and today we get the final new ride line of Set 3, Advance of the Intertwined Stars. We already saw Space Gridora as well as Greedon, so it's time for Derpy Maelstrom, or better known as Flagship Dragon, Flagberg Dragon. But before we dive into the main boss unit, let's first take a look at the support cards around it, because we not only saw the entire ride line, but also a couple of support cards which are gonna flesh out the entire strategy for Flagburg himself. And we're gonna start off, of course, with the ride line Grade 0, which is just a generic overdress starter in the likes of Officer Cadet Chari class. And as we already stated, it's a generic overdress starter, so we can immediately move on to the Grade 1 of the ride line. So for the Grade 1, we've got Inroad Shooter, and Inroad Shooter has the effects auto. When this unit is rode upon by Ascendant's Assault, call this card to the rearguard circle. So this is a free plus engine which costs us a soul, but overall it doesn't really matter all too much, because in Aqua Force or in this Flagburg ride line, we want to get as many bodies on the board as fast as possible, because we want to dish out as many attacks as possible to really benefit from our engine. So this is a great way to set that up. But on top of it, it also has another effect, which is continuous rearguard circle. If your Vanguard is Flagship Dragon, Flagberg Dragon, or Ascendant's Assault, this unit gets Intercept and Power plus 2k. So this is overall a pretty versatile card on turn 3 and onwards, because it becomes a 10k attacker, which if you went first can still hit into a Vanguard Grade 2, and it's still an interceptor, so it can give you the shield value if you need it in certain instances. It probably won't come up all too often, but it's a nice little extra addition to have that gives the deck a bit more defensive options. Now if we move up to the Grade 2, which is of course Ascendant Assault, we see the following effect. So we first off have an auto. This ability cost may be paid with Reveal a Flagship Dragon, Flagburg Dragon, or Inroad Shooter from your hand, which is basically either the Grade 1 or the Grade 3. When this unit is rode upon, cost soulless one card other than this card, and call this card to the rearguard circle. So this is very similar to the Grade 1, where it basically can call itself out from the soul to effectively get more bodies on the board. Now this is going to be a better body than the Grade 1, as we're going to take a look at its other skill, but if we do the entire ride line, we effectively have no soul the moment that we hit our Grade 3, because the Grade 1 will call itself out of soul, then this Grade 2 will call itself out of soul, and we probably going to soul blast the starter to facilitate this if we cannot reveal another copy of the Grade 3 or another copy of the Grade 1. Now the reason why this is actually a really good card to call out is because of its other effect, which is auto and rearguard circle. Once a turn, when your rearguard attacks a Vanguard, if your Vanguard is Flagship Dragon, Flagburg Dragon, cost counter plus 1 and stands this unit. So basically, if your other column is attacking into the Vanguard, he can restand for a counterblast. A counterblast restander, that's honestly not that bad. It's really good to basically get more attacks off, and multi-attack is going to be the name of the game for this archetype or this ride line. So having a card that facilitates this is nice, but the fact that we 100% are going to have access to this is even better, especially since it comes on the board the moment that we hit our Grade 3 turn, where it's probably gonna matter the most. And the fact that it doesn't lose any power or doesn't have any restrictions makes it even better to have this particular skill, which also makes it open up for combo plays, because you can play around this restriction or this condition quite nicely. Now before we're gonna take a look at the main Grade 3, let's take a look at all the other support cards to get a better feel on what this ride line and this archetype wants to do and what it actually can do. And first off, we've got this Grade 2, Aggress Blue Dragon. And first off, can we just talk about this artwork? This looks ridiculous. This is actually insane. It's an actual dragon that's a battleship. That thing on his back is the battleship. This looks pretty dope, and all the other dragons that we've seen so far actually follow this theming. If we're gonna see more of these battleship type of dragons, I'm all for this, because this looks pretty dope as a deck that you can play on the field. Like, holy crap. But on top of the fact that the artwork is actually pretty cool, its skill is also pretty good, because it has a skill auto rearguard circle. Once a turn, at the end of the battle, this unit attacked a rearguard. If your Vanguard is Flagship Dragon and Flagburg Dragon, cost Soul Blast 1, and stand this unit. So this is another multi-attacker, but instead of paying a Counter Blast like the grade 2 of the right line, this one costs a soul, which is actually really good because now you can mitigate the cost for your multi-attacks with either Counter Blast or Soul Blast, or just share them across, that you can basically facilitate a lot of multi-attacks without depleting one type of resources all too much. And yes, you need to attack into a Rearguard for the first attack, but honestly, it's just a 10k unit, so if you went first, your opponent is grade 2, and you're gonna attack into them, they probably would have intercept anyways if they have an interceptor, so you can use this to just remove the interceptor and then go for the face, which then also activate the other grade 2, which then also can restand in that instance. So there are definitely ways that you can mitigate this, and it won't be an issue all too much. Unless your opponent can clear the board, then this card cannot really restand, but we have other options to combat that particular scenario. That card being this grade 1 high rate burst dragon, yet another battleship dragon, as its abilities are: although when this unit is placed on the rearguard circle, if your Vanguard is Flagship Dragon, Flagberg Dragon, choose one of your other rearguards and it gets auto on rearguard circle. When this unit attacks, if it's the first battle of this turn, cost Counter Blast 1 and Soul Blast 1 and stand this unit until the end of turn. So this is yet another way to give any of our units multi-attack options. So we aren't completely reliant on the grade 2 of the right line as well as the grade 2 that we just talked about, because this grade 1 can give any unit the option to restand. And that means you can give it to any grade 3, any grade 2, any grade 1, which can actually be pretty damn good. And yes, it has the first battle restriction and costs a Counter Blast and the Soul Blast, but overall having a card that just increases the contingency of actually dishing out the multi-attacks and it being able to attack into the Vanguard in the first place makes the deck also more consistent on just pure aggressive output. So this is probably going to be a staple for the deck for a while until we get something better, but overall, this is actually not that bad. And it allows Flagburg to actually potentially look into other strong beaters, because now those beaters can actually restand. So there might be more to this card than first meets the eye. And the great thing about this particular skill is that you can stack this on the other grade 2s that can already restand themselves, because their restand doesn't rely on a specific wave or a number of battle. So you can use this effect to first restand, and then later during the turn you can restand them again with their own effect, which is actually a really interesting thing you can do. Now for the final support card that we've got, this is an interesting one because it doesn't really work all too well with most cards, but it does give the deck a bit more firepower in the scenarios where it needs it, because so far all these cards are just 10k or potentially 18k or 20k depending on if you persona right, which means the defensive trigger will probably shut down our offensive. So we need something like a strong beater to still overcome those defensive triggers, and that we can do with this grade 2 Creed Assault, because its abilities are continuous rearguard circle. If your rearguard was not stand by a card's ability this turn, this unit cannot attack. So this card needs to rely on either one of the grade 2s or the grade 1, and then another column to first attack and restand before this card can attack. It's an annoying restriction, but it shouldn't be too much of an issue, and the reason why it has this restriction is because of its other effect, which is continuous rearguard circle. During the battle this unit attacked a Vanguard, this unit gets power plus 10k, so it becomes a 20k beater on its own or 30k beater during a persona right turn, which is quite sizable. And because it has this restriction, it means we cannot use it with the grade 1, which allows this card basically to restand, which makes sense because that can be a bit obnoxious if we do it that route. So that's the reason why they put the first restriction on top of this card. So basically this is just a generic beater that the deck has access to just overcome defensive triggers. There isn't really anything fancy around this card, and probably would be run just for more pushing power during specific turns where you want to dish at least as much damage as possible before you potentially go into a kill turn. Now we've seen all the support cards and all the restanders and all that kind of jazz, so let's take a look at Flagberg himself and see what this all accumulate towards. So here we have the new grade 3 boss unit of this new Stoicheia right line deck, as we've got Flagship Dragon, Flagberg Dragon. And Flagberg Dragon has one skill, and is one very juicy skill, as it has auto Vanguard circle. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, cost Counter Blast 1 and perform the following effects below according to the number of attacks this turn. 3 or more, draw a card. 4 or more, choose 2 of your opponent's rearguards and retire them. 5 or more, until the end of the battle, this unit gets power plus 10k, and when your opponent would call cards from their hand to the Guardian Circle, they must call 3 or more at the same time. So it got the Super Battle Dory effect, and it can also draw you cards and retire a bunch of cards on the field. This is actually really good in a lot of scenarios, because no matter what type of field you can build, you can at least get some value out of this card. If you don't have any restanders, but you can just call 2 units to the front row, you can at least counter +1 to draw a card. Now that isn't the greatest of value, but it's similar to Barret Magnus where it at least gives you some value. And as soon as we now have an Aqua Force type of deck that draws you a card, that's actually really good because Aqua Force usually has issue with draw power. Now having that built into the boss unit is nice to at least draw into more pieces for the following turn. Now if we have at least 1 restander, which we're always going to have on the very first grade 3 turn thanks to the right line, we can get the 4 more effect, which is basically retiring 2 of our opponent's rearguards, which in most instances will probably be the back row because we're already going to attack into their front row with some of our attacks, which is great because we not only are attacking our opponent multiple times, we're now also depleting their resources, which is going to be very annoying to deal with, especially if this is going to happen turn after turn after turn. And then if we manage to have 2 restanders on the field on both front row circles, we can actually get the last effect on top of everything else, which basically makes it into a solid 23k beater or 33k Vanguard attack. That also comes with the Battle Doriev super effect, or the Super Battle Doriev effect, which basically means free cards if you even want to guard it. Now, some people might immediately notice a problem with this particular card, as it looks to be like that in most instances, this is going to be your final attack. Because if you have no restanders, you're going to swing with your Vanguard last, which means they can perfect guard it, so your triggers are going to go to waste if you want to at least get value out of this unit's skill. Now, if you have 1 restander and you do the same thing to get the retires, again, your opponent can perfect guard your Vanguard attacks, which is kind of annoying because the triggers can then be wasted. This is where the 5 or more really comes into play, because if we want to go all out and we have 2 restanders, that means we still gonna attack last with the Vanguard, which means they can still perfect guard your Vanguard attack and negate all the potential triggers. But thanks to this Battle Door effect, that means even if they're gonna perfect guard your Vanguard attack, they're gonna waste a lot of extra cards on top of it to even do something about it, which is really, really good in this instance. So this card in itself will provide a lot of offensive options, just in the sheer fact that it gives a lot of value in just 1 counterblast. And as seen as we only use a counterblast for another potential restand, that means that can go on for quite a long while. Especially since, as we're gonna talk about this card in the next video tomorrow, there has been a grade 1 that got revealed that works with this archetype for Stoicheia, which basically gives you a soul and a counter charge once you attack for the 5th time that turn. That synergizes very nicely with Flagburg, because it basically can immediately refund the counterblast before you're going to use Flagburg's ability, thus always have the counterblast even if your opponent damage denies you in certain instances, which is really, really, really good. Now, you might think to yourself, this deck is relatively straightforward in their game plan, because you're going to call restanders, attack a bunch of times, and then unleash a full power Flagburg, or at least as powerful as possible every single turn. But you can actually go a different direction with this deck. You don't necessarily always have to rely on the maximum value of Flagberg Dragon if you want to go for a threatening push. Because you might already notice that we have the grade 2 that can restand if one of our rearguards attacks into a Vanguard. And we have the grade 1, which gives the restand ability to any one of our units. So what we also can potentially do is call the grade 1, give this restand option to the grade 2 of the right line, which restands if one of our units hits into the Vanguard or attacks into the Vanguard, then attack with that unit and restand immediately with the skill that we gave it from the grade 1. Then we can use the other grade 2 that restands moment that we hit into rearguard and attack into rearguard and restand itself. Now we already have attacked twice this turn. Now we can attack with Flagberg Dragon. It's going to be the 3rd battle, which basically gives us a counterblast and draw if we want to do that. We don't have to do that, but we attack with the Vanguard. Then if we hit triggers, we can stack those triggers onto the grade 2 that's going to reset if one of our units hit into the Vanguard. He is now going to be more powerful, potentially have crits, and then we can attack with it, pressure with those crits, then we can attack with the other grade 2 into the Vanguard, restand that unit, and attack again with those extra crits and trigger power. And if we potentially have the over trigger hit, that can even be more detrimental. So we have this other playstyle where instead of going for a full power Flagburg, if we for some reason know there's a high chance that we hit a crit or something, we can go this route to effectively swing twice with the trigger power and the crit pressure as well, if we know our opponent's gonna Perfect Guard the Vanguard attack. So there are different lines of plays that we can go with Flagburg. Some of them are more consistent, some of them are more a bit more RNG reliant on triggers, but the fact that we have different lines of plays and different ways to actually attack means the deck has more options and more outs to certain scenarios. Because if the deck is more linear, that means if the game is more drifting to a worse position, that means it's much harder to actually navigate back into a winning position. But thanks to that this deck is a bit more flexible, it allows the deck to do some other plays that might help them to come back from a losing situation. And that basically are all the cards that we got for Flagberg Dragon. Honestly, the deck is actually pretty interesting, the artwork looks amazing, and I cannot wait to actually see this deck in action once we see all the cards for this set, because there are a couple of more cards left to be revealed that can definitely upgrade this deck and can definitely turn Flagberg Dragon in already a pretty interesting, pretty solid deck into a force to reckon with. So I'm very curious how far Booster is going to take this deck in this set, and who knows how far it can go with future support. But with it said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these new cards for Stoicheia, for the new Aqua Force Maelstrom right line. And I'm very curious of what you guys think and if you're very excited and happy about these reveals. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely Patreons over patreon.com/insider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/insider and become a patron today. But with that said, I've missed the time leap, and I'll see you guys in the next one!